Hi everyone, I'm going to be going live with Apeel Sciences in a bit here. We are going to be answering your questions about their plant-based protective coating for produce. I posted about it a week or so ago and we got some great questions in the comments, and we had some people submit more questions in my story the other day, so I'm going to be joined by them and we're going to be answering all of your questions about their plant-based produce coating. So once I see them here, I will approve and we will be joined by the Apeel Sciences page. You can also ask questions during the live as well, and we can get to some of those questions at the end too. So feel free to ask questions as we are going here. All right, I see the Apeel Sciences page. If you just want to request to join, and then I can approve it. For those of you just joining, I will be going live with Apeel Sciences to talk about their plant-based protective coating that I posted about a week or so ago. So feel free to stay tuned, and we're going to answer a bunch of questions that people submitted on my post, and then in my story later we got some great questions, so hopefully we will be clearing up a bunch of those questions and some misinformation that's been going around. All right, here we go.
Hi, Erin. Sorry to keep you waiting. Newbie to the Instagram
That's
live
right.
format.
That's all right. Yeah, it changes every once in a while how you get on these lives, so no worries. Yeah, if you just want to introduce yourself and kind of tell everybody what you do with Apeel.
Sounds great.
That'd be
Thanks
great.
first just to you and your followers for your time today and a chance for this dialogue. My name is Jenny Dew. I am co-founder and also Senior Vice President of Operations at Apeel. When we first started Apeel, it was really about a food waste reduction mission. So how would you fight food waste, create abundance for all from an environmental and economic perspective for everyone who participates in that food supply chain, but doing it in a way that took materials and inspiration, materials and mechanisms from nature, rather than really the way in which maybe a lot of traditional industry have brought solutions forward.
Mm-hmm. So if you just want to get into sort of generally, for those that don't know, what is Apeel, how is it made,
Sure.
and how is it applied?
So just taking a step back for a second, as far as where the inspiration for the materials came from, the way that fruits and vegetables, one of the ways in which they decay is through the loss of moisture, like evaporation through their skin, and also oxidation due to just really breathing. Produce is a living organism. And so what we found is just very early on, asking ourselves starter questions around well, how does fresh produce spoil, and how do produce protect itself? And that's where really the understanding that the formation for all of us is skin or a peel of some kind was one of the primary means by which plants try to fight off desiccation and oxidation. And so we started looking into the nature of the peel, or that layer on plants themselves, and really found that it's primarily derived of like fatty acid or like lipid-like building blocks. And so that's what led us to the use of like mono and diglycerides, which is the ingredient for Apeel's formulations, since they were really viewed as and seen, I guess found, in the peels of fruits and vegetables and all kinds of plants actually already. And also the second part of that would be that mono and diglycerides are really like abundant in our diet already today. So anytime we consume a dietary fat of any kind, so think about the fat that's in an avocado, or maybe in like a grapeseed oil, or even the minuscule amount of fat that might be in an apple or something like that. Like those are triglycerides. You can think of it as a fatty chain, 3 of them connected to a backbone of glycerol. And so when we digest those fats, you can think of them as breaking down to diglycerides and monoglycerides still attached to that glycerol. So this combination of seeing that they were in the peels themselves, but then also so abundant from a dietary, and such our metabolism of dietary fats, really kind of goes through like making and using mono and diglycerides ourselves for fuel. And then also seeing that mono and diglycerides were already present in other products. So they were already a food ingredient or food additive that had already been evaluated to some extent. So all we were doing was taking something that was existing and putting it into a new application, which is the first time to really use them as this addition of an extra peel. But then also knowing that we needed to, let's say, maybe purify them a bit further, source them more sustainably than maybe your traditional mono and diglycerides would be used in other food products already.
I just saw a question come through, so I thought maybe we could answer it now, but if you can touch on the trans fat, because that is something that I've seen some people ask, as far as trans fats being in mono and diglycerides.
Sure.
Can you just address that?
So because of the plant oils, from which the mono and diglycerides can be derived, there can be a presence of trans fats. And when we think about like monodiglycerides as a whole versus the monodiglycerides uniquely used in Apeel's application. So I think there have been understandably some consumer concern, because there's like, hey, there's no trans fat regulation on mono and diglycerides. So then I think there's a extrapolation of that concern. So then is that sort of controlled for in any way? Does that end up in Apeel's product? And then, folks end up consuming that. For us, the presence of trans fats, not only are we not supportive of that given the health consequences of trans fats, but they're also detrimental to our product performance. So there's actually no reason for which Apeel would even want the presence of trans fats. So actually they're getting rid of them, or their absence is actually important for our product being able to perform the way as well as it does, and extend helping to retain moisture. So it's not a regulated requirement, but it is a part of our evaluation of our supply chain. So how our raw materials get evaluated or qualified, and then how does that sort of carry its way through? And so we have to monitor our supply chain very carefully to make sure the continued absence of that. But we do work with very trusted suppliers in order to make sure we can carry that trust forward into a product that we would offer to our consumers, that we ourselves would also eat, very honestly.
Right. Yeah. So how is it applied, and how much is applied? I guess you can kind of, explain it in reference to the naturally occurring monodiglycerides that are already present in, fruits and vegetables, just to give an idea of how small the amount is that is applied to produce.
So let's talk about the quantities that's there, and then I'll go back and talk about how we actually put it onto the produce. So if you take an avocado, for example, it might weigh 200 grams, a whole avocado. Of that 200 grams, maybe 20, 21 grams, so that might be like, avocado good fat. So lipids, already lipids, dietary lipids. And then the Apeel layer on top of that is like 0.06 grams. So we're really talking about a very minuscule amount. But the purity actually of the mono and diglycerides is really what helps with that performance, so that you don't need a lot of it. As far as how we actually apply it, so now when produce is harvested off the fields, they are brought into a central processing type of facility. That's really why when you go to the grocery store, they're so even, almost in their size on display. It's because they're literally sorted by size, by color, maybe any other like blemishes. And so there's already an infrastructure that exists inside of these packing houses to move actually, or to process or handle a lot of our whole fruits and vegetables. So in that process, it's actually where if you might buy an apple or a citrus today, it's very likely already waxed, for example. And so in that process, Apeel kind of substitutes where the wax application takes place, so as a replacement for that wax. What happens is, and maybe this will go to a related question that we've heard from some consumers about, well, what if the possibility to trap microorganisms and whatnot? Prior to the application of a coating, there is some kind of a cleaning step that happens, and that's actually been something that's been learned from the wax industry historically, because of food safety issues that has arisen in the past, that now there is a cleaning step that happens prior to the application of a wax, and so then Apeel substitutes the wax application step.
Yep. And then, so just talking about washing too, you address sort of trapping microbes or pesticides underneath, but as far as when it gets to the consumer, can they wash it off? Does it impact, again, anything getting trapped underneath it? A lot of the things that, obviously if it's on an avocado, you don't have to worry about that because you're not eating the peel, but for things that do have an edible peel, it doesn't necessarily need to be entirely washed off. However, of course, you should be rinsing your produce. So does some of it come off? Again, are you still able to wash off different things that would be on the peel before that's applied?
First and foremost, it was really designed to be eaten, so the intention is really for it to be eaten. And if it could wash off very, very easily in water, it actually wouldn't be good at doing what it does, which is resist, slow down water from moving across it and leaving that piece of produce. But what you can, with, let's say, in the same way, that same thing washing waxed produce today, and I've seen some signs inside of grocery stores that explain this recently too. Just kind of that mechanical action of really running underwater. You might be able to, you'll wear some of it off, but that's not going to be honestly how you would take it all off. So it is designed to be consumed. You can wash, and with that mechanical agitation of your hands or whatever, that is really really the USDA recommended way of washing all your fresh produce, kind of regardless of where it comes from and what may or may not be on it. And then so some of it will be removed, but not fully. And so folks may elect to potentially peel their produce, but that's really not necessary.
Right. Yep. I think you kind of talked a little bit about benefits of Apeel, but were there any specific benefits you wanted to talk about in regards to food waste and that?
Would love to talk about the impacts we've had from a food waste and sustainability perspective. And I'd love for an opportunity to transition that a little bit to some questions that maybe folks have had about our product that's available for organic produce, because I really want a chance to share more information about that. So firstly, when, let's say in our avocado programs, so where Apeel treated or Apeel protected avocados were in the retail environment, we were doing these comparison between stores that carried Apeel versus not, and looking at their waste numbers. in the time period that we were actually active in the store, but also looking at how it compared to the same time in previous years, just to get a fair baseline. And it was really amazing. Like was way better than we could have expected at the time of starting the company and having the idea. But retailers were reducing their waste in their avocado category by more than 50%. Like, so 50%, let's say, like on average, but you'd actually see certain cases where it would outperform that. So that was really, really significant. And we did the same kind of an evaluation for like citrus, for example, and citrus actually in consumers' homes, like doing a study with European consumers and seeing that for mandarin oranges, for example, throwing like 25% less away. And that's pretty significant when you think about you buying really like a whole netted bag and trying to really make that entire supply like last before you have to go back and make another trip. So that was the reduction in waste that we saw. And what we do is we've done life cycle analysis, which is a methodology in a sustainability sense to say, like, well, for all the resources that you might need to consume just in order to produce your product and apply your product and ship that product like out into the world, you're talking about a waste reduction, but is it actually offset potentially by the footprint of your product? And so what we've been able to show is that, for example, last year, saving like 44 million pieces of produce, like preventing them from going to waste. Equivalent to basically also from a carbon dioxide emissions avoidance perspective, planting more than 100,000 trees and like saving more than like 1 billion liters of water. So really, really proud of that because it is really bringing, I think, the mission kind of full circle as to why we're doing all this in the first place.
Right.
Yeah, so sorry to dominate the topic, but I wanted to then bridge it into into the questions around the organic product. Folks may be aware that what is allowed for use in the production of organic products is more limited than in conventional produce. And so organic growers actually don't have as many tools available to them to improve quality or maybe reduce waste. And so in what we do offer for organic product is that mono and diglycerides base, but adding citric acid as an active ingredient as a way to, it doesn't kill mold, but it's called, and so instead of a fungicide, it acts more like a fungostat to kind of inhibit the growth of mold that you would kind of see like forming on your produce. So it's, it's not going to be as, we offer it to the organic side because the current formulation couldn't compete with the conventional fungicides, if that makes sense. So we really just have more of the like mono and diglycerides only product for the conventional production, but then we have this alternative offering to try to give organic producers a different option on the organic side.
Okay. Yeah, I had gotten a few questions about that, just regarding it being registered as a pesticide. So I don't know if you want to talk about that just a little bit, because I know that document is out there and some people were asking, like, why is it registered as a pesticide? Like, why is only the citric acid listed out on there and the other ingredients aren't? So you want to talk to that a little bit.
It was a fun opportunity to maybe share a little bit just about how like regulatory regimes work. And it really depends on what action is your product like claimed to be like having an effect on. So before I go into Apeel's products, I'll maybe just draw an analogy. Like hand sanitizer has an active ingredient, like let's say like ethanol or alcohol, but because it acts on your body, it's regulated by the FDA. But if you use the same active ingredient or sanitizer and it was formulated and sold and marketed as used for your countertops and other hard surfaces, that actually gets regulated by the EPA. And so in our case, like the conventional product, we talk about it as extending the shelf life of fresh produce more from just retaining moisture and reducing oxidation. So it's an action like on the fruit itself, versus the organic product is more an action to, like I said before, inhibit the growth of the mold. Like that's really like a primary like reason for that. And so because that's the primary claim, it falls more into the pesticide category. And so I think it's really maybe also helpful to understand almost the definition of what a pesticide is. And it's anything that can not just, because it has a connotation of like, we're carpet bombing the place and, like highly toxic, but it can be there to prevent or repel, in addition to like, maybe killing like certain things that would be deemed as pests. So even if you were to use like things that we think of as like preventing, in addition to something that might have more of a connotation of being like very targeted and potentially more like toxic, like they kind of just fall under the same general umbrella of the term pesticide.
Right. Yeah. And just because it's classified as a pesticide doesn't mean that it's like you're like can't consume it either. I mean, there are a lot of food things that we can eat that also can be used as pesticides too. So I think that I understand where that like confusion or fear comes from, because it's like, well, it's a pesticide, we shouldn't be eating that, but there are many things that we consume that are also effective pesticides too.
Yeah,
so
there's quite a lot of work that goes into ensuring that, what are the safe levels that are allowed in food, a lot of dietary exposure, but also understanding your potential exposure from other roots as well, to make sure that those limits are appropriately set. And they're also reevaluated on a periodic basis. So sometimes folks will see, changes to sometimes those allowable limits or these like maximum residue levels. And it's not necessarily that anyone like super got it wrong the first time. It's just as new information comes in, regulators are making those adjustments or those changes. Maybe just one chance to address also like the label, because I know folks have been a bit upset about like other ingredients and not really seeing what that is. That's more about like following the rules of what a pesticide label like really requires. And so it is, because it's more focused on the presence of an active ingredient. That's why calling out what the active ingredient is and its amounts is a requirement on the label. And then other things that are like inert ingredients basically fall into that other ingredients category. So so it's not about wanting to be transparent. It's more about staying in compliance with the regimes that we are regulated by.
Right. So then in those other ingredients, like if it were to be listed out like a food, like what would the ingredient deck look like? What would those other ingredients be? Because I know people were having a hard time finding what those other ingredients were. So if you can just kind of address like what, if it was, like listed as ingredients on a food, like what would that
monodiglycerides and some baking soda in order to buffer the action of citric acid. So that's it.
Okay, so those are the other ingredients. I know I was getting tons of questions about that, but yeah, it's not that you're trying to hide anything. It's just that's how that specific document and that labeling is. And the other ingredients are those same mono and diglycerides and some baking soda. So is there anywhere that people can find an ingredient list if they want to see like, I know like it does explain on your website like mono and diglycerides, but I just didn't know if there was anywhere that like the ingredients were specifically listed out on like a spec sheet that's publicly available.
That's a good question. I was going to first direct you to the website, or you can go back and take a look to make sure, is there anything potentially like more explicit. But if I were to, I'll describe to you what our product package literally looks like, and it's a bag and ingredients : mono and diglycerides. So maybe just for like an additional like comparison or additional resource, like you can actually go and buy mono and diglycerides, like because they're used in like baked goods, peanut butters, like other folks have access to mono and diglycerides too. Again, I talk about like differing maybe purities, for example, depending on the necessary use case. But you actually can go online right now and like buy a bag of like mono and diglyceride, like solid fine flakes, for you to use at home, like in your own, in your baking and cooking. similar.
Yeah. Yeah, you'll even see that listed out. Yeah, you'll see that listed out on some items too. So yeah. Um, so there was a question, how will I know if my fruits and vegetables are protected by
Yeah.
Apeel? Is it labeled?
So with the labeling, it's really there's like different ways in which a disclosure in general could show up. And a disclosure from a regulation perspective, it can either be that there is something there, or it might sort of list a product by name. It's actually, to list that something is there at all is kind of actually the primary. The FDA doesn't, for example, or even the EPA doesn't sort of care like what brand it is, for example. It's just that these ingredients are here, or that there's something here. So it depends kind of sometimes on the format. If you buy packaged produce, or if it was, again, that netted bag of citrus like I was describing before, there's usually more real estate because it's of the packaging in order to print something out. So you'll also see that for like waxed produce, for example. Sometimes it might be on the carton or the side of the box. So sometimes you'll see that that whole box could be something that a produce clerk like wheels out, or it's actually part of the display in some way, shape, or form. Or there's signage in the grocery store somewhere provided by the retailer to let you know that there's produce in their produce section that might have some kind of post-harvest like treatment done to it.
Okay. Let's see. Oh, this was one that I covered in my video, but is it top 8?
Yes, it's top 8 allergen free. In fact, we also comply with the EU's list of allergens as well. That's more like a list of like 14, for example. So yes, absent of allergens, and those are things we also periodically test for. We kind of control for it up front very tightly when we first get our supply chain like stood up. And then it's something that we monitor for to confirm the absence of those allergens.
And then heavy metals as well, if you want to kind of explain
Sure.
that too.
Yeah, it seems like there's been maybe some like misunderstanding of a prior GRAS notice that we had, up on FDA's website, where you could look at test results from an Apeel sample and listing things like heavy metals, basically not just saying 0. And it's a good opportunity to talk about really just the presence of heavy metals in the environment around us as a whole. So plants, because as they're growing, they're taking up material from the soil and maybe from also the air. Those heavy metals are then like naturally occurring in the plants themselves. And so since we are using a plant-based feedstock, those contaminants can therefore still be present, farther downstream by the time we purify them for our use. They may be like reduced in their levels along the way, but I would say there's a variety of folks who are regulated all those different steps to ensure that heavy metal content, whether, because if that raw material was just going to be sold directly as raw material, or maybe it was going to be processed into other things, that it's compliant with the heavy metal residue limits at all, kind of in all of its possible forms. So that's, Apeel doesn't add, and certainly would never want to add heavy metals intentionally into our products. So in summary, they're really there because they're present in the plants themselves naturally, and we ensure that in their final product, they're not present at any levels that would potentially exceed any safety limits.
Yeah, I see that confusion a lot when I talk about heavy metals, just generally in foods. Like, I think some people assume like the company is adding it or something like that, but it is just going to be present in, plant material. So monitoring it, making sure it's under specific safety levels is really kind of what that's about. So how do we know that Apeel is safe to consume long term?
So I'd like to kind of reiterate the perspective that like monodiglycerides weren't newly created by Apeel. They are in our dietary fats in some percentage. They are also the products of the digestion of our dietary fats. And monodiglycerides have been produced on like an industrial scale since the 1930s. and they've been like in the food supply chain really like through that whole time. And so again, Apeel's case is more like a new use of an existing ingredient. But the safety around monodiglycerides has also been studied, and it's also part of why there's, it's like a unanimous decision across multiple regulatory bodies, the US, the EU, the World Health Organization, and Food and Agriculture Organization. They're like sort of joint committee, as well as others, that monodiglycerides can be consumed with no limit on their allowable daily intake. I think on some of your other content that you've posted, you know, maybe recently on like aspartame and the like, you know, you talk about what these levels are, these allowable daily intakes. And so for monodiglycerides, these regulatory bodies have already deemed that back in the 70s that it was, there was no limit. And those also get reassessed, and they look at it from studies that are available, you know, academically or maybe provided by companies, to make sure that that continues to be true. So the European Food Safety Authority, for example, recently in kind of like 2017 did a first like a more recent reevaluation, and published their results looking at different kinds of like studies on that. But again, because of really like from a chemical perspective, you really can go in and analytically like draw the molecules, you know what they are, you know where else they're present, and because of the their presence in our dietary fats and that natural like digestion process, there hasn't been like expressed concern about that raised, and the data seems to continue to support that.
And just to reiterate too, like the amount that Apeel is adding is, you know, minuscule compared to the amount that we're getting in our diets already, whether it is just naturally present or added, like you were talking about in a bakery item or something like that. So it is a very small percentage of like what we're already, monodiglycerides we're already consuming.
No, that's a
too.
great point.
So,
like in dietary fats alone, like if Apeel didn't exist, and if no other monodiglycerides existed in the rest of your diet, they could already actually be present in like 1 to 3 or 5% of your fat intake already because of their natural.
Right. Yep. Yeah. We already talked about the organic and the pesticide registration. I think maybe you, I don't know, how long roughly is the product supposed to extend the shelf life?
No, I haven't.
I'm not sure if you already answered that.
That's a great question. So I think some of the concern could also be like, wait, like if produce is natural and it's supposed to spoil, like, you know, how long are you making this go on for? Is it sort of like a, like robo fruit? I don't know, for lack of a better description. So let's take like an avocado, for example. What Apeel does is, well, when an unprotected avocado that doesn't have Apeel on it, you kind of know this experience. You squeeze around for it in the store, you bring one home, you're kind of like watching it closely, and there's almost like one day, likely like a window of one day, where just from like a firmness perspective, you're like, I think I might be able to use it now, like for my avo toast. Like it's just firm and soft enough. But you almost like wait an extra day and it's like too far gone. Like you can't use it for that same use anymore. You got to sort of change your plan around it. And the worst case would be if you've actually cut into it finally and it was just totally like black on the inside. So what Apeel does is take that one perfect day and make it like 3 or 4 perfect days. And then, so it's like taking the lifetime of an avocado and just like extending it, like slowing everything down a little bit. It's really what happens when you put things into the fridge. You're slowing how much water is lost. You're slowing like how much that produce breathes, so it's oxidizing more slowly. It's really like thinking about like a way to kind of reduce your reliance on refrigeration or just slow that process down. But it's not really intended to do that forever. It's actually really important to know, 'cause I did see something kind of spin by a little bit earlier, like if we actually sealed this up like super tightly, if this coating was totally unbreathable, you'd actually have a problem with your fruit starting to ferment, and it would develop all these off flavors, and you'd actually know that you have like a bigger problem. So for us, it's like we want it longer. It's actually impossible to make fruit last simply forever. So an avocado, you get 3 extra like perfect days. So if you hopefully have a chance to use it, and imagine, you know, that citrus fruit being able to get more like an extra week. But that's because citrus already lasts a lot longer already. So you take something that's already really long, take it a little bit longer, and that's relatively longer than something that lasts a very, very short time and could only make it a few extra days.
Right. I saw some confusion too, just like regarding, I think sometimes it can be a little confusing. Like, I think people think sometimes if something is like a piece of fruit is able to last longer and stay fresh, like somehow the nutrients are declining at the same rate as if like it wasn't staying fresh. I don't know if you can kind of explain that. I tried to explain it, but it's, yeah, if you want to try to explain that, just because I think that is like kind of confusion too. It's like, well, sure, like it seems like it's fine, but aren't the nutrients still declining at the same rate as if like that coating wasn't
it's a
on
great
there?
question. And it's also like understandable because it's not necessarily that this is like common knowledge for everybody. So I'll take a crack at it.
Right.
So let's take blueberries, for example. This is definitely one we've actually also had a chance to measure. So blueberries we eat because they're high in like antioxidants, high in vitamin C, for example. And what we've done actually is, so let's take berries, like harvested at the exact same time, and then the same bush and everything, and then you can actually have one that ends up being protected by a peel and one that's not. And on day, let's say 5 or day 14, you can kind of go and you measure that vitamin C content relative to day 0. And you'll actually see that the peel protected ones, their vitamin C levels stay a lot higher, whereas the one that's unprotected has been degrading. And the reason is the produce is breathing, like we've talked a little bit about before. So every time you kind of have more of that exchange of oxygen, where your antioxidant is kind of like interfacing in a certain way, right, with that incoming oxygen. So by really slowing down the ability for that oxygen to come in, but not so much that you choke it off, because you really want it still to be able to breathe. We just basically slow down the breakdown or that consumption of the nutrients. And so that would be kind of similar to like if you left it on your countertop versus you put it in your fridge. Just imagine like if you left it on your countertop, but maybe it had a peel on it, and you didn't have to actually maybe always put it in your fridge, or maybe you have a peel on it and you put it in your fridge and it lasts even a little bit longer altogether, because you have the benefits of the cold in addition to the peel.
Right. Yeah. So it's actually slowing down that process in which causes nutrients to dissipate. So it's not like it's like somehow keeping it like looking good while the nutrients are like decreasing. It's like the oxygen and moisture, like those are the things that are it's helping it to keep those nutrients for longer. So let's see here. So I think we answered that question. What is the difference between a peel and other commonly used produce coatings? I know you mentioned like wax coatings, things like that. So what's the difference, not only in like ingredients, but as far as like shelf life as well?
A chance to kind of like share a little bit like why we at the founding of the company, like once we heard about like the tremendous levels of food waste, like almost almost half basically where food that is grown never gets consumed, and 45% of fresh fruits and vegetables perish before we have a chance to consume them. Like we started kind of going like, is that like possible? And so when we started asking questions about like what technologies or what practices really exist today, and that's where we saw there was maybe more innovation that had happened for pre-harvest and stuff like in the field. But this whole kind of post-harvest side has been, there's a little bit more like room still to innovate. So a very, very heavy reliance on refrigeration. It's kind of why right now, like when produce gets harvested, the first thing everyone wants to do is like, they say like pull the heat off of it. Like cool it down basically as fast as you can. And that's really what we rely on through the whole trucking and, into some of the grocery stores might have refrigerated displays, and you come home and you pop it in the fridge right away. Some of the other like post-harvest solutions out there might be, so wax has been a historically long used one. When it was first done, I say thousands of years ago, you imagine a super, super thick coating of wax, dunking an apple into a vat of molten beeswax. Nowadays, it's a very, very thin layer of wax, but typically it's because consumers have preferred shine on their produce. And so, there's maybe some benefit, but we've found that Apeel, just on a moisture loss, the ability to retain moisture, I should say, and reducing the oxidation, performs better, for example, for actually extending shelf life, even though Apeel doesn't add shine. The use of post-harvest fungicides, is a big piece of that, and so, waxes might be formulated to carry fungicides. There's also packaging technology. Again, we're trying to reduce the loss of moisture and the oxidation, so it's kind of why now we've got bag salads, or sometimes a bunch of smaller peppers in a single bag. You don't want them to be totally non-breathable. It's actually why they've got little holes in them, because they can actually sometimes rot too much if they sweat in the bags too much, for example. So plastic or some sort of packaging combined with refrigeration, and then the use of historical, or the current and historical use of wax and post-harvest fungicides is more more of the current state, and now considering Apeel in the mix too.
Mm-hmm. So yeah, that's a good point too, as far as another benefit. I'm assuming it can, in some cases, cut down on plastic packaging as well, because obviously if you use this, you wouldn't necessarily need to cover it in plastic. So another benefit to using coatings like these,
yeah,
versus
absolutely.
plastic packaging.
That's where the offering that we have for cucumbers is really exciting. Instead of your long English cucumbers that would be shrink wrapped in that plastic, that they could have an Apeel protective layer on it instead, but last the same amount of time or longer.
Right. Yep. Does Apeel alter the flavor of the
No,
produce at all?
We talked about how small an amount is really added, and so we're really there to help that produce shine with the quality that it comes with off the field, mm-hmm. and that everyone else has worked really hard to grow for you. So no, it's neutral. Even if you just took a bite of Apeel powder, neutral. And so a very, very small amount of it doesn't
right.
add anything. And we've also done that through third-party taste testing. Let's say strawberries that were protected with Apeel versus not, and with a panel that was tasting, and could they really tell the difference between them, and there was no detectable difference.
Okay, I'm gonna look here to see if we have any. I don't see anybody submitted any questions through here. Was there anything else? I think I covered all the questions that at least that we got through my post and then through my story. Was there anything else that I might have forgot that you wanted to cover, or did we kind of cover all of it? I'll keep monitoring too. If people have questions, feel free to submit them through the question box so I can see them through there. If you submitted a question in the comments, I won't necessarily see it, so feel free to submit it in the question box and I can see it.
I feel like we covered good ground. Would be eager to see what folks share in the comment thread. Maybe a comment that I would share, just not necessarily a closing thought because we haven't closed yet, but I think going back to really I hope folks thank you for just taking the time, I guess, to try to listen and understand just where Apeel came from, why we exist and why we do what we do. It was really with the motivation of seeing that like we've got a growing population to feed. We actually have a way under consumption of fresh fruits and vegetables, and then you know, we know what a great impact that both the more plant-based diet, but also the improved consumption of fresh produce could have on like preventable disease, like preventable chronic disease. And then so when you hear that like 45% of that produce is thrown away, that's really like, that's, you know, it was almost like the atrocity of that is where this came from. We definitely know that while we want the latest and most novel materials in our mobile phones, like that's not what we want to eat. And so that's why the motivation to look for the materials that are in plants already, used the same way that plants like use them, you know, as these like structural building blocks, you know, and finding a way to make that work like on fresh produce. And so in our case, the strong performance of Apeel products actually comes a lot from their purity. Other formulations, you know, may include a whole bunch of other stuff to make it more like, you know, easier to work with or whatever, so that you could apply it or maybe dry it faster and all these other things. But we actually haven't gone down that path because it takes a lot actually away from the product performance, because the workhorse is the mono and diglycerides. And we also know that those are not necessarily things that people are going to be pretty excited to be consuming or feeding to their families. So I just maybe wanted to share a little bit more of that background with folks. And, you know, a final motivation is really also that, you know, me right now, like, and you right now where we are today, like live in a part of the world where access to refrigeration, which we rely on so heavily after harvest in order to get food, you know, from where it's grown to where people actually need it and eat it, like, we're very lucky to have that infrastructure, and there's actually a lot of places in the world where that cold chain is really either broken, not reliable, or not existent. And so Apeel was also born out of the idea of being able to provide these tools to more, and trying to make them more accessible ultimately to smallholder farmers in emerging markets that you know, where that would make a really big difference. So that's not something we actually talk about a lot, but felt like that would be important to share.
Yeah, I mean, I think I personally wanted to like cover this as well on my page, just because I think it's unfortunate that there is consumer fears, especially when it comes to fruits and vegetables. Most of us are not getting enough fruits and vegetables as it is. So when I see something like this that's actually helping to reduce food waste and people are afraid of it for whatever reason, you know, I like to clear up that misinformation, just because many of us are not getting, you know, there is a lot of issues with access to fresh fruits and vegetables. So if this can also help to increase that access and allow it to be available to more people, and just, you know, not being afraid of fruits and vegetables when you're going to the grocery store, because I know that you know, that fear can be it can be difficult when you're looking at different, you know, food choices, and of course you don't want to decrease your fruit and vegetable consumption because you're afraid of some sort of like coating or something on it. So I just, yeah, for people that want to know sort of like why I think this is important to cover, and why I wanted to share this information on my page, that's a huge
Super. Thanks so much, Erin. Really, yeah, we appreciate that. Yeah, it's a big challenge, and you know, I think a lot of different just new ways of thinking, you know, as far as trying to tackle the problem are needed.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I'm looking, I see, well, there was one question, I don't think you probably have a number, but somebody was asking how much plastic has been saved. I'm sure you don't have like an exact number for that, but you did share some numbers in the beginning just regarding like food waste. So I don't know if you just want to share those again for people that join
sure.
later on.
We do have a calculation somewhere that we've done of like the equivalent of, you know, if you shipped 1 container load of cucumbers and that was replaced with plastic, like how many equivalent plastic straws that would be. So we can always share that back out so that you can share that with your followers. But yeah, for those who maybe join the call a little bit later, With Apeel protected avocados, when they're brought into the retail store environment, we've been able to measure in multiple different cases where we actually had the produce in store over like several months, a 50% reduction in the waste levels in that store. We also did the same thing for citrus fruit, specifically mandarin oranges that were brought into European consumers' homes, and actually doing some of those measurements with the consumers themselves and seeing a 25% reduction in waste there. So last year, through the use of Apeel protection, we were able to save or prevent 44 million pieces of produce from going to waste in all the categories in which we operate.
That's awesome. Somebody asked, this is a good sort of question to end on. Where can I learn more info about Apeel that we haven't covered here? We covered a lot here. I will be, just so people know, I will be posting this on my page as well, so you can watch the whole thing if you weren't able to catch the whole thing. But if people have additional questions as well, you can also ask those in the comments on this post. But where can they go to find more information about
the first and probably easiest spot is to hop onto our website. And we've also got a new section that's been added called Peeled Back, where you can jump in and dive in a little bit more deeply to some additional questions and facts about Apeel. Of course, finding us on our Instagram, and being able to reach out with us there too. Apeel_sciences.
Yeah, I'll have it tagged on here too so people can find it. Do you have any closing? I don't see any more relevant questions at least. Oh, wait, just a second. Okay, I think we're good on questions. We answered a lot of questions. Yeah, do you have any closing thoughts you want to talk about?
Just really, again, to say thanks to you for this opportunity, for your followers for making time to just join in the dialogue, listen and learn. Hopefully, we'll be able to continue the conversation with you and them as well. And then I think last but not least, our vision of the world, and we hope that it's one that folks are starting to share a vision for too, is if you need to go to the grocery store to buy produce anyways to feed yourself, that if you could make a choice and it ends up being Apeel protected produce, that you're actually making a choice that's also better ultimately, not just for you, but also for the planet. So it's one that we hope we make produce both more available, that it's desirable, and that when you bring it home, you can really rely on a consistency of quality. So, if those are all the things that you would want, and in making that choice, also one that's lighter on the planet, we thank you just for considering Apeel.
All right. Well, thank you so much for joining me today to answer some of these questions. I know it was a very popular topic for people to be asking questions, so I really appreciate the time spent in answering these questions. Like I said before, for everybody that's on here right now, if you didn't get a chance to get your question asked, or if you're watching this later, post it on my page, feel free to comment in the comments with your questions. But yeah, thank you so much for
appreciate it.
today.
Thank you all. Bye.
Yep. All right, bye.